The standard and standard specular shaders are only two of the available shaders here in the Unity editor. Dropping down under the list of shaders under Standard Specular Setup, we can see that we've got FX, GUI, Mobile, Nature, Particles, Skyboxes, Sprites, UI, and Unlit, and also Legacy. In our FX shaders, we have a flare, and this shader is really meant as a particle texture, as a flare on a light. There's our text shader for GUIs, and in Mobile, a range of shaders that varies from the standard considerably. For example, a bump specular here in Mobile is just a shader that has a shininess and takes in an RGB alpha image for color and glossiness and a normal map. There's no other sliders available in here. The reason for this is that some mobile platforms may not be able to shade as well as desktop or console, and we need to adapt the shaders we're using and the look to that particular platform. Under Nature, we've got SpeedTree and SpeedTree Billboard, if we're using SpeedTree, an external program to create our foliage. We've also got Tree Creator Bark, Leaves, and Leaves Fast, and also some soft occlusion bark and leaves. There's terrain materials, diffuse, specular, and standard. For example, in our terrain diffuse, it's just a terrain material with no parameters because we'll add those in terrain, but that's outside of the scope of this course. In our tree materials, we'll see similar maps to some of the other materials we've used, although these are made specifically for trees, where we're defining in an alpha specifically for a bark and a normal and a gloss. Again, these are made for trees created with Tree Creator here in Unity. Particles have their own special materials as well. For example, if we're dealing in an additive soft particle, we'll see that the blending here, as defined by the alpha, changes the appearance of that material. Particles are often transparent or have a degree of transparency, such as smoke puffs or flames, for example. We need to be able to define not only where are they transparent, but how do those transparencies blend together when we have many of them in a scene. We'll get more into the particle textures later when we start building our visual effects for our attacks. Our skybox materials let us determine a skybox, that wraparound sky we're seeing in our scene. There's some variations on skyboxes. A 6-sided skybox, where we'll take in 6 HDR images that define the different sides of our skybox. Additionally, we can have a rotation in it for changing that daylight and an exposure. There's a cube map, again taking in a special cube map file, which is really a compilation of 6 images. And a procedural sky, which is what we're seeing wrapping around our test scene. In this case, this procedural skybox is defined by a sun and a sun size. There's also an atmosphere thickness, sky tint, and ground. This procedural sky lets us accurately have a sky contribution to our models and a contribution from the color of the ground bouncing in. We have a sprite material, and we'll use this in UI elements in 2D games, where it's got a tint and a pixel snap, and not many other parameters. Again, these sprites are intended to come in and simply be displayed as they were authored. We have UI materials, and there's lit and unlit. Most of these are, again, outside the scope of this course, but be aware that there are special materials for user interface elements. There's also an unlit material, if we need a game to be exactly unlit, not reacting to light, and have texture and transparency. For example, looking in the color of the unlit material, it's simply a solid color that displays only that color without regard to lighting. I'll make this color, for example, blue, and put it on my duck. We can see now that the duck is exactly not reacting to light. This is useful in some situations depending on the look of the game and the stylization. Changing to an unlit texture, for example, shows just that albedo on that duck. Again, useful depending on the look of the game we're after. In the Zombie Toys game, we're after a bit more realistic shading, so I'm going to return this back to a standard shader. I did put the wrong material on the duck. We can see in here the importance of having the right material to match the object. I undid that material application. We can definitely see in here the importance of having the right material on our game objects. Lastly, there are legacy shaders. And again, these are from previous versions of Unity if you're working on an older project, for example, where we'll see different material properties that predate physically based shading. To sum up, there are many different materials available here in our Unity editor. We'll use the standard shader for all the objects here except for UI elements and particles in our Zombie Toys game project. But keep in mind that you can really customize the look of your game depending on the shader you choose and the art style you're going for.